My mind is set, my grind is set, my heart on ice is cold. I'm only here to even a score. Whoa. My mind is set, my grind is set, my heart on ice is cold. We're down right now, but did it before. Whoa. See from here we going up. Made the call, I shown up. Now the game is sewn up. Say my name is blown up. We up, 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 we up. See from here we going up. Made the call, I shown up. Now the game is sewn up. Say my name is blown up. We up, 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 we up.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Knighted Ones podcast, episode number 82. Can you believe it's been 82 episodes of TK1? As a reminder, we're the only podcast that features a former UCF national champion, a former UCF radio host, an ESPN analyst and hoops player, an infamous rapper, our resident influencer and IG star, shooting the breeze, talking UCF sports. Remember to like and follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and check out the 70-plus teams and conferences on the College Huddle, Big 12 Huddle, Fourth in Florida, and New Stream. All right, today's episode is just going to be me and Ben, a little shorthanded today, so not too many introductions to speak of. So with that, let's bring Ben onto the show because it's just going to be me and him today.
What's up, Alan? I'm glad at least we were able to join the pod tonight and hold it down for the rest of the group. We got a few things to talk about here in Knight Nation, so I'm glad to be with you, and it's good to be back on after a week or so off for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's actually surprisingly a good amount of news between the football team and the basketball team and the baseball team. So we're pretty stock full of news here. So let's get started with, obviously we usually start with football here. So pretty active time right now for the 2026 recruiting class for UCF football. Since last podcast alone, the Knights have added 3 new verbal commitments to the 26 class. So Frost is starting to cook a little bit. Started out with more on the defensive side, but 3 of these last 4 recruits have been on the offensive side of the ball. So the first one that committed was wide receiver Tyron Wortham. This is a guy that right now is currently ranks as the highest rated prospect in UCF 2026 class. This feels kind of like, that classic Frost UC fast, like offensive get that we can be excited about. We know UCF's wide receiver core has not been as deep in recent years as we're accustomed to, especially under Frost and Heupel and O'Leary for that matter. But Wortham had a lot of big offers. He's a high 3-star, nearly a 4-star, top 100 in the state of Florida, which always a good thing. You'll always take a top 100 player, no matter the position, but especially wide receiver. Ranked as a number 90 wide receiver in the country. Coming out of Sarasota, plays at a pretty good program, Booker High there. They've had some success in the past, but he's been a really standout player in Central Florida. He was named the MVP of the Under Armour camp in Orlando, which is a huge camp. I used to work for the Dolphins in youth programs, and the Under Armour camp, they have them in South Florida, Central Florida, North Florida. It's a real big, showcase. They usually do 7-on-7 for that stuff. And, if you can be the MVP of that's pretty impressive. And, last year he had a breakout season at Booker, 67 catches for a little over 1,300 yards and 17 touchdowns for a Booker squad that made the semifinals of the Florida 3A playoffs. So, I think this is a real good get for UCF. This guy's a dual sport athlete. Is also on the track and field team, so he's got some burners for sure. 6 foot, 175 pounds. I think this is going to be a really good get for UCF, and it's good to see. Obviously this is Frost's first recruiting class back at the helm, and it's really the first skill position player that he's landed. And we know how well he did the first time. So it's kind of exciting to see that first skill position player. What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, it's just that it's funny you mentioned he won the MVP of that Under Armour camp because I'm very familiar with won the defensive MVP of that Under Armour camp, and
Oh, that's awesome. Didn't
my
know that.
nephew Jake. Looking at his offer list, I mean, it's just a mile long here for Tyron Wortham. I mean, Michigan State, Arizona, Colorado, Boston College. I mean, he's got Georgia Tech. He's got a lot of different offers here, Louisville, Kansas State. So, I mean, you can kind of go down the list. I mean, even SEC schools like Ole Miss are in there.
Sure.
So that he's definitely got a long list of interest here. And at 6 foot 175, it just kind of, as you mentioned, Alan, it just kind of seems like that typical or prototypical Frost recruit that's just going to completely, burn you down the field and, kind of on brand for Scott Frost of getting that kind of, not super tall guy, but, not super big guy, but that, track athlete that's just going to outrun the defense. So I'm excited to see that. I'm excited to see a wide receiver recruit in general because, as you mentioned, I mean, it just seems like under the Gus era in particular, we just got kind of used to trying to poach a last minute transfer here and there, from a bigger program to just to try to plug in holes. But as we saw this past season, there just wasn't a whole lot of depth at wide receiver. And I think it's one of our biggest kind of question marks that we've talked about going into the fall season, where, Scott Frost and staff are trying to figure out who that star receiver is going to be. And I think the jury's still out on that. Obviously, this is a 2026 class recruit here, but I'm glad that we're going after some of that, not only top wide receivers in the state of Florida in this area, but also recruiting for that very on-brand speed element that Tyron seems to have. So I'm excited about that first and foremost.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think before it's all said and done, we could see him as a 4-star recruit. I mean, I'm a big fan, as I've said on the show, of the 247 composite score because it accumulates all of the different outlets and stuff. But I mean, if you look even just on 247's, just like their own individual ranking of him, I mean, they have him as pretty much a top 50 guy in Florida, top 62 wide receiver, and then Rivals has him as a top 80 player in the state and number 62 wide receiver. So clearly one of the better, upper echelon wide receivers in the country. So and with a 5.7 rating, I mean, he's on the verge of being a 4-star. So, one big Power 5 school comes in with an offer, he probably jumps up to a 4-star.
That's probably what does it. Yeah. Or one more great performance at a big time camp this summer is also what's going to really push him over the edge, I would imagine.
Yep, absolutely. So big get, definitely, I think the biggest of the 2026 class so far. Obviously, it's still in the early stages, still small with just 7 verbal commitments, but right now the highest rated player. So second, we ended up getting a tight end athlete, Charlie Jilic. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but Frost did this occasionally in his first tenure here, but went out of the state of Florida, grabbed a guy from Portage, Michigan. So interesting kind of place to look, but tight ends, that's don't necessarily need the fastest guy per se, or necessarily need a Florida guy, right? But this is a 3-star verbal commit as well. 6'5", 240. So already pretty big for, just finishing his junior year of high school. Like I said, coming out of Michigan, this is a guy that is why he's listed as an athlete is because he plays not only tight end, but he plays linebacker as well for his high school team. And he had a really strong I could not find his offensive stats, but defensively, he had close to like 100 tackles, something like 3.5 sacks, and a few tackles for loss. So he plays on both sides of the ball. However, UCF is recruiting him for the tight end position. And when you look at him, he just looks like a prototypical tight end more so than like a linebacker. But, he's highly rated in Michigan. He's a top 25 player in the entire state. Considered a top 100 athlete in the country. So, definitely has some, recruiting chops. The The offer list is not huge. It's, all of the smaller schools in Michigan, like Western, Eastern, and Central Michigan, has an offer from.
He's getting all the corners of Michigan, of the state of Michigan, except for the Michigan.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
no Michigan State either. But yeah, so no, we're his only Power Four offer presently. I don't know if maybe the fact that he's top 25 in Michigan doesn't hold as much weight, obviously, as other states. But I mean, seems to be a hell of an athlete. Guy that's playing on both sides of the ball, is racking up stats. Obviously, I don't know much about Michigan high school and that area that he's in, if it's a top area for high school football. But Frost has always been able to get guys and coach them up and develop them. I'm not saying that Charlie is necessarily a developmental prospect. I don't know much about him, but he looked good on tape. And tight end, obviously another position. We just lost Randy Pittman, obviously, in the portal. We have a lot of youth there. So I think we could use the depth. So I think could ultimately be a good pickup.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, not only a proven athlete, I believe he's he plays on the basketball team at a school as well. So he's playing a couple sports, and at 6'5", 240 in high school, I mean that's quite the frame for a junior in high school, and so. That's a good starting point for a tight end, especially when he's showing that much athleticism to be able to play the entire game on both sides of the ball, rack up nearly 100 tackles on the season. He's clearly the athletic type that is hopefully going to be able to make a name for himself eventually in this. I say eventually because it's like, man, it's tough to talk about high school recruits because you don't know if they gonna.
No.
We're starting to get conditioned now where it's like, do we get excited about high school recruits for UCF because are they going to stay? But anyways, I think that he's the type of guy, and it seems like you said, whether he is a developmental type prospect or not, because like you said, we don't know much about him, but I think the type of athlete, the type of player, the type of person that Scott Frost really seems to be trying to recruit, as he has shown in the past, is those guys that are just have the drive and have the personality type to develop, to come in and try to make a name for themselves, not try to expect anything right out of the gate. And so maybe Charlie is one of those guys, and I like the athleticism that we see as far as being able to play both sides of the ball, and certainly he's a multi-sport athlete as well. And that size, I mean, that 240 at 6'5" in high school as a junior is certainly a good size to bring to the table.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So, we'll see how it goes. I mean, there's always going to be part of the recruiting class that hits and some that doesn't. But I like the direction that Frost is going in. It feels kind of like the first time that I think the on paper is better than the first time around, but it's not the on boom type of where we're getting these super exciting 4-star, but that's okay. I mean, I think that's the bread and butter of UCF. Let's get these high 3-stars. We'll get some 4-stars now that we're in the Big 12, but we saw what happened with Gus. Those didn't work out. I'd take a high 3-star that can be coached up by a good coach over a 4-star that's not going to be developed at UCF by my coach Malzahn. So we'll see how it works out for Charlie. Then the third one came in, I think, earlier today, which was back on the defensive side of the ball. Antoine Sharp, he's a linebacker. So this is the third linebacker commit of the 2026 class. So 3 out of 7 recruits so far at linebacker. Clearly a point of emphasis for Coach Frost. And, we've had some issues.
You think they've identified a need there? Maybe.
I would say so. We know how bad that position's been for really a long time now. It's been going on, feels about like 5 years. I mean, it was a little better last year. We've had some names there like Jason Johnson and some guys that have individually been solid, but it as a core, as a unit, has not been good, as we all know. But Antoine Sharp, this is another big get, probably the second best player on paper in the class after Tyron Wortham. 6'1", 212 pounds plays at Palm Beach Central. That's in my neck of the woods, sort of out of Wellington. They have a pretty rich football history. Guys like Jordan Travis, Florida State's former quarterback, played at Palm Beach Central. They're a real good program. They were a game away from the state championship in 2023. So the Broncos have a real strong program. So getting guys out of this, there, I think is always a good, and, keeping the South Florida pipeline open, I think is so big. I mean, obviously would love to get as many Central Florida guys because that's our backyard for UCF, but South Florida obviously produces some amazing talent. So that's great that we're getting him. But anyways, he's pretty much on the verge of being a top 100 player in the state of Florida by the 247 composite, ranked as a top 70 linebacker in the country. So really has all the measurables at 6'1", 212, and definitely has a solid offer list, including Jordan Travis's old school, Florida State, is one of his offers, as well as West Virginia. You got a couple other power forwards on there like Indiana, Maryland, Mizzou, Pittsburgh. So solid offer list for sure. And probably, either probably the second best player of the class, best player on defense for sure. So I think this is a big get. You could tell maybe the class started off a little bit on the slower end, but lately you could see there's, I know stars and all that don't quite always materialize, but the rankings of the players are you could see it starting to pick up, and we're starting to get these top 100, top 150 guys in the state of Florida. And I think that's where we want to go, right, Ben?
Yeah. I mean, again, we're kind of conditioned as UCF fans to not, to say recruiting, rankings don't matter, and like all these different, stars don't matter either, and obviously we were moving in a direction where we certainly were pumping our chest out about stars during the last few seasons. But right now we're with 7 commits, as you mentioned earlier, Alan. We're at number 34 on 247 as far as our 2026 rankings go. That's nothing to sneeze at. I think in the previous time that Frost was here, we would have just jumped for joy if we were even close to the top 50, and we're sitting here at 34 with admittedly, I think to guys that are paying attention to it, like you are, we're off to a start, but it's not necessarily like this just giant, fast start right now. So, with the 7 commits we got already ranked at 34 in the nation, I think we got some room to even improve on that front, which is a great spot to be in. That's another guy in Antoine Sharp that as you mentioned, there's linebacker is going to be a position that we're really going to need to shore up in the coming years, just like we talked about with wide receiver and other skill positions that we have on the offensive side of the ball. And so with someone as the pedigree of Antoine Sharp and from where he comes from, and if we can continue to kind of take a look at that, that area in South Florida in general, just, obviously we want to recruit out of the Central Florida for sure, but being able to dip down in there in South Florida with some of the coaches that we have that has connections down there, I definitely want to continue that pipeline as well. And so hopefully Antoine is going to continue to open that up for us. We've got some good recruits here as far as rankings go and ratings go. And so hopefully we can just continue that momentum and the good vibes that are coming out of this camp from Scott Frost and the rest of the coaches.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And like you mentioned, UCF's composite ranking right now is 34. Literally 2 weeks ago, we were in the high 70s, like 78. So when we pretty much jumped, whatever it is, 30, 40 spots there. And a lot of that is, just from 2 recruits in Sharp and Wortham. So you can see the difference that 2 recruits can make. So if we're, starting to build this momentum, we can get, a couple more high 3 stars, low 4 stars. We should, obviously there's, I'm sure, plenty of teams that are under us right now that you wouldn't expect to be because they only have maybe 2 or 3 guys. It will obviously shift a little bit more, but I don't see any reason why UCF couldn't finish in the top 40 this year, and not just paper recruits like, Miles Omega. I think we'll have a really good class that we'll all feel really good about as Knight Nation. And we're on our way. I mean, yeah, it's top 34 right now. Obviously, we know not to get too excited about that because guys can leave and, you know, other things happen. But I do think it's heading in the right direction. So like you said, Ben, 7 commits. So, you know, we're just getting started, starting to, you know, get some new positions in there with corners and, you know, wide receivers, tight ends. We even got an offensive tackle now. So starting to fill out kind of nicely here. So we'll keep you updated on that, as I'm sure over the next few weeks and months, there will be even more commitments upcoming. So
yeah, and it just doesn't on the recruiting front, Alan. Doesn't it just feel like it just everything feels different now that Scott Frost is back? But it just on the recruiting front, it just like even what we just have mentioned a couple times to each other in this conversation, it's like that, you know, we don't want to get too excited, but it just feels like the pitch is different, right? Like we talk about the vibes being different, yes, but the pitch that Frost and his staff can make to these high school recruits, it feels like it's what's the right word for it? It feels like it's not as hollow, right? Like, I mean,
yeah,
that they actually do have a chance to make an impact early on with this, they'll be given the opportunity to do so. And maybe that's just because it's a new coach coming in, you know, brand new staff. You know, everybody's got kind of that opportunity to make an impact early on, but it really does feel like that's the commitment and the transparency that Frost and his staff are going to try to bring to these, you know, to these recruits as they're going out on the trail is that they truly do have an opportunity to make an impact early on. And even if they don't make that impact right away on the field, that you know, helping them sell them on the vision of like, we're not just going to have a turnstile of like, you know, 50% of our, you know, turnover is going to be in the portal every single season. You know, and it may wind up being that way just because it's the nature of the sport nowadays. I mean, football is not as bad as basketball in that particular situation, depending on the team. And it seems like we're going to try our best to focus our pay for play dollars more on, you know, trying to keep our best athletes here at home. But by the same token, it's I think it just the vibes and the direction of the program just feel different. And I bet it's a different type of pitch to the high school recruits that we weren't really getting over the last few years. I mean, it's a you know, it's a catch-22, if you will, or as far as, you know, it's two different strategies. It's more of trying to get those guys through the portal versus development and really pushing them once they get on campus, even as a freshman, to try to grow into that role as quick as possible. But it just feels a little different nowadays, like everything does with the football program, for sure.
yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that was well said, especially the part where it doesn't feel as hollow. It feels like we're
Yeah.
getting the right guys. And I love that Frost and we'll get into, you know, that would be kind of the next segment we talk about is the interviews that Frost just gave, you know, following the first scrimmage. But, you know, he's talking about building this program the right way. And, you know, which is, you know, he keeps going back to, you know, building it through high school as much as you can and, you know, building the right way in this era. But he is still emphasizing what he emphasized the first time around, which is team culture. You got to build that. And he's saying even more in today's day, you need to have that culture because you're going to be basically cycling through new roster year after year annually. So I mean, he's saying all the right things. It feels like he's doing all the right things. And it definitely feels so much less hollow. Like, those booms from Malzahn by year 3 started to feel like, all right, you know, we're used to it. It's cool, but like, are these guys even going to play and work out? You know what I mean? Like, is Malzahn just going to go get these 4 or 5 year transfers from like Vanderbilt and Auburn and, you know, plug them in, you know, or maybe it'll work out. So, you know, it does definitely feel a lot more real with some of these guys. And you feel like we may be getting the next Gabe Davis, the next Adrian Kellens and stuff like that. So obviously you're still going to have roster turnover in this era, and there's going to be some of these guys that leave and flip and all that. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think the guys that stay and he gets are going to, you know, pan out, or a good portion of them will. So yeah, let's talk about the interviews. So obviously, UCF did have their, they're in the midst of spring football right now, and they had, some scrimmages recently. They did have some open practices as well recently because they're not having a formal spring game this year. But Frost really gave his first sit down, or not sit down, but first interview or extended interview with the media since basically his introductory press conference when he got hired again. So he said some interesting things in there, Ben. I don't know if you had the chance to kind of look it over, but just some of my initial impressions. I think he kind of recognized that this team looks a lot better than the first time when he was here. There's just like an upgrade in talent. I mean, obviously that team was talented too, but he basically said, we're Florida, we're fat, we're in Florida, we're fast. So he knows the speed there. But he talked about, there's a lot of work to do, as you'd expect him to say in April, 6 months before the season or whatever it is. So he said there's not a crazy amount of surprises. There's a lot of things from the technique standpoint that still need to be fixed, and stuff in the weight room, and then also just the players learning Frost and his coaching staff's expectations, which are obviously vastly different from the previous coaching staff, and all the holdovers from the players that are returning from last year have to kind of get used to that. So he talked about that. He talked about some of the other coaches in their system, like Coach Grinch, and obviously a lot of emphasis was put on, media was asking him about the offense and quarterback. Mostly coach speak answer. Nothing has emerged yet. All the guys are taking reps. We're evaluating, blah, blah, blah. But there was a couple nuggets in there, and he did talk about, similar to, I can't remember, I think it was Becton who actually talked about this last week or the week before, that they both have said that Waden Charles, is a freshman on the team right now, has wide receiver, has really stood out. So Frost is the second coach to say that. So that's encouraging to hear that about the wide receiver room. And he singled out a couple other players, but basically I think the overall essence was, there's still a lot of work to do. The scrimmage went, okay, as much, as good as you can expect with guys that are, still learning the system, getting adjusted to a new coaching staff and all that. What did you take away from it?
Yeah, that was definitely the highlights, what you mentioned there. I think one of the other things I'll add to it is just watching the interview with Frost is that I think frustrated is probably the wrong word, but he definitely he felt like a little bit frustrated that the defense seemed to be a little bit ahead of the offense. And that's usually what happens during, these kind of spring camps or maybe early on in fall camp, where you're still trying to install a lot of things, especially on the quarterback, but on the offense in general. And so defense kind of takes advantage of that. They have a quicker learning curve, where it's much steeper on the offensive side of the ball, especially when you're talking about a system that, Scott Frost and Steve Cooper and KZ and everybody's just trying to run, which is, while we don't know all the details of it, we have seen evidence in the past of Scott Frost's offense being, rather complicated and you've got to read the defense really well. You've got to know all of your reads and progressions throughout that offensive scheme. And it's not a very simple scheme to learn from a quarterback or from just an offense in general. So I'm sure there's a lot of installation things that they're going through, a lot of growing pains that seem to be, with worn on Scott Frost's face, I guess, a little bit while he was going through that interview. He seemed a little bit kind of, not necessarily hoping that the offense would be further along, but it was like, did we have to throw, or did we have to have 3 turnovers in the scrimmage, those kinds of things. He mentioned the turnovers in the scrimmage, and he's like, it's my team and I'm happy that the defense got the turnovers, but it also means that we turned the ball over. And it's like, so it's
right.
It's like this weird catch-22 when it comes to the inter squad scrimmages and in the spring practices, spring scrimmages. It's just you want to see the defense perform well. You don't want to see them get carved up, especially when the offense is still being installed. But you also want to, I'm sure there's a desire from the offensive coaching staff to have them kind of accelerate their learning curve. And I'm sure it's happening in a good way. It's just, that was one of the things that kind of I picked up on during that press conference is just a little bit of, for lack of a better word, a little bit of like frustration on how quickly the offense is getting up to speed.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I think, yeah, you're like you said, we kind of do see that annually in the spring where the defense is usually further along. So no, those are all good points. I think one other takeaway I had that I really liked, and it kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier with the culture thing, but basically Frost was asked about, the portal obviously now has windows and is going to reopen up here in a couple weeks where basically guys from UCF's team can transfer out, but also UCF can go grab some more guys in the portal. I mean, we already have, I think, 29 in this portal class. So maybe we go get a couple more depending on what happens with the current roster. But I like what he said to the response to Brandon Helwig, who asked this question, which was, the biggest thing for me is we're starting to get a really good culture with this team. The team's starting to come together, and that's hard in this day and age with 29 new players or whatever we have, trying to take the collection of individuals and make them a team. So he really continues to emphasize, that culture. And I think that's so important. Something we really lost for the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, you saw Trey and other former players talk about it. There just wasn't the accountability. There wasn't that, that stuff going on in the sidelines during games when we were down and whatever. So it is really good to hear him say that. And so it'll be interesting to see, what happens here with the portal. We saw that when Frost first came here, he was able to save some guys from transferring, guys that had mentioned they were going to enter the portal, but then switched their mind due to Frost, whether it was the Henderson twins, and there was obviously a couple other guys as well, Najala Kelly. So it'll be interesting to see now that they've been with Frost for whatever it is, 3-4 months now, who's going to end up leaving. And it's going to something's going to happen, obviously, just because that's how it is nowadays. But it'll be interesting to see how much that culture is impacting. I would think that we're not going to see any expected impact players, guys that are widely expected to be starters or big players on the 2 deep will leave. But I guess we'll find out soon.
Yeah, I mean, and it still remains to be seen who the heck the 2 deep players are, but obviously so it's a little more clear on certain positions, like you mentioned, on the defensive line, and I think there's a couple offensive linemen as well. But but certainly, I mean, this whole portal era, I think they're still feeling it out as well, and because Scott Frost hasn't coached in this era yet, and so that's something that he's trying to feel out as well. But I think it seems like from the outside looking in that he is going about it the right way. He's establishing the culture. Seems like guys are buying in early and quickly to this, to the culture that he's trying to establish. And that's great. It was funny when you mentioned the transfer portal, Coach Milton, which is still a hard thing for me to even say, not hard, but it's a surreal thing for me to say, Coach KZ, if you will, during his press conference, I think he was asked by Jamie Say, a local news reporter, about the transfer portal, about the quarterbacks. Hey, are you guys thinking about picking up an extra quarterback or something like that if one of your quarterbacks leaves? And it was funny. He had this big smile on his face, kind of like, man, I should have been more prepared for a question like that, but I wasn't even thinking about that. Like, he literally seemed like he's like, wow, that was a tough one to answer. He kind of had a very genuine reaction to that question. And I would say from watching it, it was a good one in the sense that, hey, if one of these guys does leave, it might be a little bit of a surprise, and we'll certainly pursue someone to try to fill that spot so we can have a full QB room. But he immediately said, right now we have 5 guys in that QB room that I'm very comfortable with going into this season with, and I hope that's the case. I hope that they're all here because, those are the 5 that we want to roll with, and we're not looking for, and without saying it, he was saying, like, we're not looking for anybody else, beyond those 5 guys, unless one of them, leaves, so.
Sure.
It was just his reaction to that question was just classic because it's this genuine nature that KZ certainly has, and definitely Scott Frost has, where he gives you those little nuggets because he doesn't really know any other way but just to be kind of himself. Like Scott is going to, Coach Frost is certainly going to throw some coach speak out there. Like he's
Sure.
he's a veteran. He's not going to be naive and throw some and tell you everything. But by the same token, he just has this kind of genuine nature about him that certainly KZ has as well. And it was a cool moment to watch that, because he looked over and he's like, well, you kind of got me there. That was a tough one, he said. That was a tough one.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It is crazy to say Coach Milton or Coach McKenzie. So
Yeah.
that, I think we throughout, until maybe KZ becomes a veteran seasoned coach, we'll probably get some good nuggets from KZ over the years.
Yeah.
I think he'll keep it pretty real. So yeah, I mean that's pretty much the most of the news here when it comes to UCF football. I did see one thing, and I did forget to mention one thing, and I was a little hesitant. It's interesting. There was another 2026 commit. For some reason, is not on 247, even though it happened days ago. But Brandon post about it. So obviously Brandon is the most reliable it gets. So if he posted it, but we did have a defensive back, Jakari Jackson, who committed to the 2026 class. And the only reason I'm hesitant, I'm wondering if this is a walk-on sort of scenario, because he, basically has no offers. He has us and Mercer. So literally it's not even like he has a G4 offers he's got, or G5 offers. He's got really nothing. And even the headline of the article was a surprise, Jakari Jackson lands surprise offer or whatever. So I don't know if it's like a preferred walk-on scenario. Maybe that's why 247 doesn't have it. But he's a defensive back out of Olympia High. So don't know how much he adds to the class, maybe an under the radar type of guy. He doesn't have a ranking, does not have a state ranking, doesn't have a 3-star, 2-star kind of anything. So maybe still early for him, and maybe UCF or Frost is, maybe kind of diamond mining there. I don't know, but 5'11", 175. And Olympia is obviously a school in Orlando, so local guy. I don't know, again, if it's a walk-on situation, but in theory, UCF would now actually have 8 guys in the class. I just wanted to mention that before we moved on.
Yeah, I even saw an article the other day, and it wasn't an article. It was like a segment on Sports Center where they were talking about the possibility through the oh man, the term is escaping me now. The revenue sharing that's coming up, and the House settlement that we'll see what happens there in the coming months. That there's a potential that with the amount of money thrown around in college athletics, that at least for football and basketball, that there will no longer be walk-ons actually. So, like,
Really?
It'll be straight. Yeah, it'll be like that they'll no longer be walk-ons, in the sense that what an athlete that would have been a walk-on will still get the benefit of some sort of scholarship or some sort of money to be able to play sports and be on the team and all that. So it was something that I saw kind of quickly on SportsCenter the other day, as something to keep an eye on as this revenue sharing and as the House settlement develops over the next few months.
Interesting. Okay, good stuff. So that will wrap up UCF football. As far as them, they basically are going to practice Thursday, Friday, and then they pretty much are set to wrap up on spring practice in the middle of next week. So they'll practice the end of this week, and they'll practice through Wednesday, and then spring practice is done, and then we basically get ready for summer ball, which is the eve of the season. Still have a ways to go, obviously, but when you get into summer is where it starts to position battles get a little bit more intense, and you start to hear a little bit more news. So we'll keep you updated there. So let's go into basketball, which Ben, I'm sure you'll have a lot to say here. Obviously, we know the basketball program, as disappointing as the finish was to the regular season, had quite an exciting postseason, arguably the most exciting postseason since like the NIT kind of Final Four run that they made in this new tournament here, the College Basketball Crown. So we're going to get into that. Obviously, if you watched, you know that it was a 16-team tournament, and UCF was able to win 3 games and make it to the championship game in the first ever inaugural College Basketball Crown tournament here. Unfortunately, they blew a lead that they had for a good portion of the game, ultimately losing to Nebraska, which is ironic that Frost comes back and then we play Nebraska in this Crown championship, and we lose 77-66. So, I mean, I think we could talk about, Ben, we talked about before the show, talking about the semis against, Villanova, which we got to win, and obviously a Nebraska game. But I'm just curious. I think we'll get into a lot of topics, but I mean, what are your, we'll get into the X's and O's of the game, but what are your just thoughts on that run in general and what it means?
Yeah, so I want to start with the tournament itself first. I think Fox and the College Basketball Crown tournament presented an interesting case for an alternative to the teams that don't make the NCAA tournament. And one of the things a couple things that they did really well, I think, is not trying to compete with directly with certain with the big tournament, obviously with the big dance. Not trying to compete directly. They actually, gave the ability to kind of take advantage of the Final Four week and the anticipation and leading up to the Final Four by having the entire tournament during that week, like Monday through Saturday, so Monday through Sunday, essentially. And having those 5 games that UCF played, during that time. So obviously that's a stretch of basketball that you're really only used to seeing in the very early on in the season, these kind of preseason tournaments. But even then, that amount of games in that short period of time in a college basketball sense is not as common nowadays. But it is an interesting format, 16 teams. And the other thing that they did, I think, that made this kind of a fascinating thing to look at moving forward is that they paid everybody, they paid their way to the tournament. So you have 16 teams make the tournament, and they said all expenses are paid to come out here to Vegas, all in one location, and do this tournament for the week. And then obviously, as it's been pretty publicized throughout Night Nation and anybody who has looked at the Crown, is each round, as you made the quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals, were a certain level of NIL money that are given to the players. And something that Mark Daniels has brought up throughout this week on the radio, but I find it an interesting thing to look at moving forward, is like, there's plenty of times, I think, when I was growing up, when I was very young, you would never think that a certain bowl game that was super important, like the Rose Bowl or whatever, that you'd have players willingly sitting out of that game, right? And then all of a sudden, 10 years after that kind of became the norm, where certain players, if they weren't playing for the national championship, they would sit out of an important bowl game, even something like, Fiesta Bowl, Rose Bowl, whatever that may be. What if, 5 years from now, all of a sudden it's not 50,000 for the team if you make the quarterfinals and 300,000 for the team if you win the championship, but what if it's $10 million. Like, it's a 16-team tournament, and they get all these investors and this big money into it, and they say, we're going to invite the biggest brands in college basketball, and we're going to go up against the big dance, and the winner of the tournament gets $20 million or whatever it may be. It's something crazy number like that, right? Like, if you're a player on Kentucky and you're a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament, and you've got to win, you've got to win, 8 games essentially in a 3-week time period to win the championship and to be college basketball's national champion. Are you going to take the risk of doing that, or are you going to go and say, I got to win 4 games to win $2 million myself? Like, the players might vote a little differently at an era that we're in right now. So I just want to briefly talk about the Crown, because it's an interesting thing to look forward and say, what would happen if someone a group of investors just try to blow this thing up. That being said, the inaugural edition of this tournament, I actually think once you got over that UCF's not in the big dance, this is some tournament that nobody had ever heard of 6 months ago. Once you got over that kind of initial shock and you just watch the games, you're like, wow, this is actually presented in a nice way. It's exciting basketball because, the games themselves were exciting because you got a bunch of players on the teams that are just going after something. I mean, they're not mailing it in, that's for sure. All the games that I was able to watch in the Crown, which of course were all the UCF games. I'm not watching USC and Villanova closely, admittedly, but I think the games that we were able to observe from a UCF standpoint were highly competitive, and it was a brand of UCF basketball that we had missed seeing this year, especially from 2 different elements. One, just playing together defensively and kind of swarming the ball and getting after it and really buying into each other, or buying into the defensive game plan. But I think most of all, which was most evident with this group of players that played in the Crown for UCF, is they truly seem to play well together, especially on the offensive end. The ball never seemed to stop moving. And that was really encouraging to see. And also at the same time, you kind of had this little thing in the back of your head, like, man, if our star players that we had that did not participate, some of our star players that didn't participate in the Crown, in particular, I'm going to say his name, Keyshawn Hall, like, if we had more of a buy-in on ball movement with a player like that in our lineup, how much better could we have been against the teams in the Big 12? Because you heard all of us talk about it either, all year, but in particular, Roger and I saying how we never see UCF make a UCF player make the extra pass. Keyshawn Hall was not great about passing out of the double team very well. The ball seemed to stop. And when you see the kind of extreme example that they were able to put on the court this past week in the Crown tournament, it kind of makes you wonder, like, what could have changed if a player of his caliber, Keyshawn Hall's caliber, could have bought into that offensive game plan a little bit better than he did. Instead of, with the benefit of hindsight, it seems more like, was he just trying to get his? A sacrifice of winning, if that's what it would take. And I think the results of that in the Crown tournament is that we played a winning brand of basketball, and we were able to not only stay in games, but come back when we needed to, make runs when we needed to, make stops when we needed to, and win the game. That game against Villanova on Saturday night was extremely exciting. I mean, the run that we went on to finish out that game, I'm not exactly sure what happened, but I mean, we were in the lead most of the game, and then all of a sudden Villanova makes a crazy run. They take the lead in the end there, and then DJ hits that, just hits that crazy shot, the moon ball, as the as the commentator said on the broadcast. I mean, just that crazy shot to tie it up and go into overtime. I mean, how could you not be so happy for a guy like Darius Johnson that he not only had 42 points on that game, but he hits the biggest shot of the tournament, bar none, to force overtime. And then he and we as a unit just kind of take over in that game. And so I'm really proud of the effort that the team played for. It was fun to watch. It was fun to watch a UCF team play so well together, which we've only seen in kind of spurts this year when you're really looking back and trying to be critical of the type of basketball that you watch throughout the season. It was fun to watch them play together. And then I think that just from observing Johnny Dawkins as well, I mean, it just seemed like the team that he was just really happy to coach. And granted, I'm being a little harsh on Keyshawn Hall, but quite frankly, I can be harsh on Keyshawn Hall because he's not a UCF Knight anymore. He was a 1-year rental, and I am somewhat happy for him that he was able to get his bag at Auburn. But he's no longer a player that I'm going to think about because he's not a UCF player, and and we didn't do much with him team-wise on the court because we had a few good wins, but most of all, I think this season outside of the Crown basketball tournament will be looked at as a disappointment. And the last thing I'll say about this season in general and the Crown in particular is that the biggest benefit to our program, in my opinion, was that it got us to 20 wins on the season. Now, granted, 20 wins is paired with 16 losses, but our first round win against Oregon State, I think, guaranteed a winning record this season. So I'll take that after we, had a tough losing streak there in February. So I'll take that. But then getting to the championship game, getting that 20th win on Saturday night, I mean, that's our first 20-win season since we went to the NCAA tournament. And so I'll take that. We'll take that as a positive moving forward. And I hope that the certain players, especially Mustafa Chiam, that I really, really want to stay and try to see what he can do next season with UCF. I hope that the experience of the Crown enhanced and solidified that he wants to play with guys like Jordan Ivy-Curry, and he wants to stick around to see. He wants to play for Coach Dawkins, wants to stay with Mamadou Ndiaye, and stick around and see, what this group could do next year. But he's going to be a guy that we're going to have to keep an eye on over the next week and hope and pray that he is a UCF Knight next season because he's going to get thrown a lot of money at him. And Keyshawn Hall can make $2.5 million that he's reportedly making at Auburn. You can guarantee that some team is going to throw a boatload of money at Mustafa Chiam. It's just the reality of the situation we live in.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I mean, that's got to be the goal at all costs. I mean, I think it's like you said, he's the most important person to keep, and he's the one we should be trying. At this point, it doesn't matter who else transfers to a degree. Like, we need to try to keep Chiam. He's the building block of the team for next year. But I wanted to go back to what you said in the very beginning about the tournament. The college basketball Crown. How it could. If you do get investors behind it, could it become the number one tournament? And I think very easily. That's literally all it takes. I mean, literally look how quickly the NIT just went to irrelevance. Literally in one second.
Irrelevant.
It went from a fairly premier, at least prestigious tournament just due to its history. And still, it was a nice consolation prize for a lot of teams. Every year in and year out, there was plenty of big name programs in there. Obviously not the top of the top that were competing for the March Madness tournament, but in general, you would see there was Villanova's in there. There was, all types of Power 4 schools in there, and it was a fairly decent honor to win it. And in 1 second, due to the college basketball crown, you look at the NIT this year, there wasn't a single Big Ten school, a single SEC school, or a single Big East school in the tournament. It had a grand total, I think, was it 5 Power 4 schools, and some of those were, the Oklahoma State and
Yeah, I think Oklahoma State was
Stanford.
the only Big 12 school in the tournament, and then the rest were, I think, were ACC schools. Since to your point, it's just
Yeah. It just went into complete irrelevance, like at the blink of an eye. So that, I mean, is there a world where the college basketball crown could take over the top side? Yeah, sure. I mean, I think people like the 64 team format, so they would maybe expand it, but at the end of the day, it's all money and just a name. So sure, money could make it so
Yeah,
very easily.
I don't want to be like total hot take central here. I don't think that. I mean, the Big Dance is in my opinion, is the best postseason in all of sports, no matter what professional level or whatever. It's the best postseason in all of sports. And I'm not saying that it could take over. I'm just saying that you could get some disruption in there if you get big money, because that's what it's all about nowadays.
Oh, 100%. You could definitely get some disruption in there. And I think for the first year of the tournament, like you said, it did really well. I think they did a good job with the broadcast. I think they made it exciting. I think you had some premier teams. I mean, you talk about USC and Villanova. I mean, these are, Villanova won the national championship, 4, 5, 6 years ago, whatever that was. I mean, you had some pretty good, solid teams in there. And it was exciting, and it was a lot of really good games. My thought on the UCF thing is, I had kind of in my head, if we won, how it have felt. I kind of was thinking like, the effects of this wouldn't be felt. Maybe we wouldn't see them right away. We wouldn't know what that meant. But I think it would have been really cool to go down in the history books as winning the first ever crown tournament. Like, that's a great trivia question, something people might remember. But, to see the team lose, basically right at the end of the season, lose Mikey Williams and Keyshawn Hall and all these guys, and to really come together with basically a roster of 8 guys, 7, 8 guys that are playing in these last 4 games that we had and win and not just win. I mean, they overcame adversity. Like talked about the Villanova game. I mean, that was a game that looked like we were, SOL. We were on our last leg there. I thought it was hopeless. And then obviously DJ goes and hits that big shot, and they were able to come away in overtime with probably a Villanova squad that's likely more talented, more deep than us. I know it's
I wanted to mention that. I mentioned that in our group chat. I definitely wanted to mention it here, is that Villanova, that team that we beat on Saturday night, they're all 8 of their top 8 scorers were in the lineup and healthy on Saturday night. So like we weren't beating some ragtag group of Villanova. Like we weren't beating a shell of Villanova this season. We were beating their team that we beat the Villanova team that played throughout this season. Now, granted, obviously they're a team that won the national championship, as you mentioned, a few years ago. So like they wanted to be in the big dance, but that certainly wasn't the shell of Villanova, at least this season. It was all top 8 of their top scorers were on the court that night.
Yeah, sure. And so, I was really impressed with how, I think we talked about, I mean, you weren't on the pod last week. We talked about like, what did we think UCF was going to do in this tournament? And I literally said, I think we're going to beat Oregon State. We're going to win 1 game. We'll probably lose in the second round. But then, they come in and they have a great performance in the second round. And then, the Villanova game, I was like, wow, they looked great throughout. They pretty much had control from start to finish. Yeah, Villanova took a couple of minor leads, but for the most part, UCF never lost control into that last, minute there.
Mm-hmm.
And then they got it back with a huge shot by DJ, and they went in overtime. And the Nebraska game, again, I think UCF was only favored in the Oregon State game. The other 3 games they were not. Then Nebraska had was a 3.5 point favorite, but UCF at one point was up 10, 11 points. I mean, they had a good control, but then they kind of blew it there in the as we in the second half there. But overall, I think it was a really nice finish to the season, and it somehow, the storyline was just better with the fact that we had our leading scorer leave us. And for a guy that went and got $2.5 million, that's like striking. It's like, holy crap! I didn't even know if there's a UCF football player that could get that much, let alone a UCF basketball player. So it's it was really cool to see the team band together, especially behind a guy like DJ, which, I was talking with some buddies. I mean, is he potentially the last ever 4-year player that ever happens in UCF basketball again? It's quite possible he will be the last person in UCF basketball history that stays for all 4 years from start to finish. So to see him lead his guys and have a 42-point performance, and I was looking at his stats, finishing, I think he ends up finishing number 7 all time in scoring. He's top 3 in steals. He's top 3 in assists, I believe. So, to see that, it was really cool. So it kind of made a nice ending to a overall sour season. And, even if we'd have won, I think it would have been one of the bigger accomplishments in UCF history. Obviously, winning the crown is not our ultimate goal, but it would have been a cool thing. So losing didn't hurt too much, but overall it was a nice finish to get, like you said, to 20 wins. It was fun to watch, and it was good to see Coach Dawkins, bring a shorthanded team to the finals and beat some good teams along the way.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a UCF basketball fan, there's just, if you're watching those games, you kind of, if you're hating on the tournament that they're in while you're watching the games, you're just a hater, like it's just like you just wanted to hate it, right? Like, instead of just watching, like, hey, I get to watch another, another chance to watch my favorite team play.
Like watching a meaningless bowl game, you still want to watch it because it's another UCF football game, even if it's the Boca Raton Bowl or whatever.
Exactly the same. Yeah, it's the exact same concept as that, as the UCF being in a 6-6 bowl game, right? And so, I think it was a great opportunity, and I'm glad that they took advantage of it. I agree with you. It would have been so cool to win it. And I think that ultimately they just ran out of gas, especially DJ. I mean, he got banged up in that semifinal game. He clearly was nursing some sort of hamstring or some sort of injury during that championship game, and he was just trying to gut it out for his last collegiate game ever. It was kind of surreal watching it because you knew, win or lose, it was his last game in a UCF uniform. And I mean, I've said it on this show before, but I mean, he was one of 7 players throughout all of Division I basketball. We're talking 300 plus teams. He was one of 7 players throughout all of Division I basketball to have stayed and contributed more than, all 4 years or plus with his team this season. One of 7 players in the whole country. So to answer your question, I think that stat alone answers your question, that he is going to be the last one, unless some major rule changes happen. I think he's going to be the last one that we can talk about like this. I think this crown run alone like solidified him. He's going to be a future UCF Hall of Famer. I mean, I just think that the appreciation for Darius Johnson, a lot of UCF basketball fans already had it, but it just increased throughout this tournament. And the main thing for me it would have been really cool to win it, but ultimately it would have been really cool that Darius Johnson went out as a champion. Like, that would have been cool. I would have really liked to see that, just out of respect for what he's done for this program. And so it's a shame that it didn't happen. That game was a total game of runs. It was back and forth early on. Nebraska went on a big run, and then we went on a big run in the first half to end the first half to tie it up at halftime. And then all of a sudden we just explode out of halftime, and we had a 14-point lead with, I think, about with about 15 minutes left. We had a 14-point lead in that game, 35-49. And so that was where, again, and then all of a sudden it was like we couldn't score for a little while. Some of the fatigue of those games, in particular the overtime game the night before, I think started to show through. Jordan Ivy-Curry had an amazing game in the championship game. He just tried to carry us for the most part. He had 29 points. Mustafa Chiam had 3 or 4 really big blocks. He had 12 rebounds, or 11 to 12 rebounds in the game. He was an impact player throughout. And I think DJ was just too banged up, but it would have been awesome if we could have finished that game out and came out on top. But hats off to Nebraska. And lastly, to your point about it would have been cool to win the first crown ever. That was what I think it was. I can't remember the name of the main play-by-play guy. Mark Jones, I think, is his name. That's what he made sure that was what was said as soon as, Nebraska won the first ever, champion of the college basketball crown tournament is the Nebraska Cornhuskers. And I was like, as soon as that happened, I was bummed that we lost, but I was like, man, that would have been cool if that was UCF.
It would have been really cool. Yeah. I mean, something you'd remember that would have been cool. And it's like, but yeah, overall, I think it was positive and, it was, any way you look at it, it's one of the farthest, one of the most, I guess, the deepest we've gotten in any postseason tournament, really, if you think about it, other than the NIT run. So, regardless if it's a second tier tournament or what, I would consider this, I don't know, somewhere in the top 3 seasons in the last decade or so, something like that. If you just consider the postseason, obviously the expectations and where we could have gone maybe dent that a little bit. But you talk about winning 3 postseason games. I mean, that's happened one other time in UCF history with the NIT run, really. So, at least some sort of positive in there. So one other thing that came to mind to me, which I've seen kind of talking a little bit, we're talking this with friends, also seeing this on the boards and Twitter and stuff. Is Darius Johnson like a guaranteed first ballot Hall of Famer for UCF basketball?
I think that there's probably, I think that the short answer, the easy answer is probably yes. I don't know where that list really lies as far as UCF basketball players in the we had such a long time where they didn't have any inductees into the UCF Hall of Fame, and so I don't know where that list is. I'd have to look at the list to see of the great UCF basketball players that aren't in the Hall of Fame yet, to answer that question fully. But I would expect that once he becomes eligible, and the understanding by the committee who is going to ultimately choose him to be in the Hall of Fame. I think the understanding the committee that, as we just mentioned to each other, like he's kind of the last one. He's like the last one of a dying breed here, and potential for the future of the UCF Hall of Fame from a basketball standpoint in particular. The future of the UCF Hall of Fame from a basketball standpoint being, we're just probably going to choose guys that come here on their last year. They're able to graduate with a UCF degree and they just did great for 1 year, 2 years. And you kind of adjust the criteria based on the nature of the sport as we go on for the next decade. I think the realization by the committee, once he becomes eligible, that is the fact and that is the reality of the situation that we're having moving forward. I think that probably gets him enshrined in a first ballot Hall of Fame situation, just for all those reasons and kind of the projecting that I would do if I was on the committee. I would say, like, where are we going to get another opportunity to do this in the next decade moving forward? So yeah, I would say that he solidified himself as a UCF Hall of Famer. I mean, top 10 in those very important categories, a great career overall, and the longevity of sticking with our school and being a UCF guy. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, I talk a lot about, and Trey does too, about these group texts that we have with our former teammates, and it just, well, I didn't play I didn't play 4 years, but I stayed with UCF the whole time. But like I just stopped playing basketball. But by the same token, it's like those guys that are in the generations prior to the last 5 years, it feels like such a bigger connection to the university, such a huge pride. Whereas, you look at a guy like Keyshawn Hall, who has now transferred, and you see three schools ahead of the school that he has just transferred to. He went to Auburn, but before that he was at UNLV, and like here, and UCF is the last one before Auburn. It's I think it's going to become more norm for players by the time they leave college athletics, and especially in basketball, to see it's going to be more normal for them to have at least 3 schools as opposed to 2 years at the same school. I think it's going to be more normal than that, unless something changes. So that's a very long-winded way to answer it. I think that guys like DJ are going to be projected as so rare in the future that he gets in the first chance he gets.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying, and I get the landscape of college athletics and how we perceive things then versus now, I guess, play into a decision like this. But, just looking at, the standard for Hall of Fame either way, regardless if it's 1 year or a 4-year player, still has to be, did they do great things individually at the school, regardless of the length, and there obviously has to be, I think, some team success. I mean, unless you just do something completely outrageous or whatever for 4 years and you just happen to be always on bad teams. But DJ, when I was just looking, I looked through UCF's while you were talking Hall of Fame class. I only saw 3 basketball players on there. Maybe I don't know if that's it's fairly new, the Hall of Fame. I'm not quite sure, but the only one I recognized obviously was Jermaine Taylor. And I'm sure the other 2 that are on there were great players. But when you look at it,
who are the other 2? Is it Bo Clark and Jerry Prather, or who are the other 2?
Yeah, let me
I'm sorry to put you on a spot if you had already clicked that off.
No, it's okay. So
I'm sure it's
one
Bo
is
Clark
Benny
is the other.
Shaw.
I'll say again.
Benny Shaw.
Okay.
Daryl Davis. And then Sinoa Phillips.
Okay, yeah. So those are the Division I players, I guess, that are in there. I'm sure Bo Clark's in the UCF Hall of Fame.
I see Mike Clark is also on here.
Mike Clark was his brother.
So it looks like I'm seeing like 5 or 6. Sorry, there's a couple more than I guess I initially saw, but then a Calvin Lingelbach.
Yeah, Calvin Lingelbach. He's a 2 sports star. I know Calvin personally very well because I see him.
Oh, Bo Clark is on here. Yes, Bo Clark's on here.
Clark's on there. Okay, some names are a little bit lesser known than others, but you're right. I mean, obviously Jermaine Taylor, he fits into that first category of like, exponential, like individual talent and, statistics and all that. But you're right. I the only caveat I'll say to what I said earlier about DJ being a first ballot Hall of Famer is that he's not a first ballot Hall of Famer if you don't first make BJ Taylor and Taco Fall like first ballot Hall of Famers. Like
100%. You have to. There's no way. Yeah.
Right. And I don't how many years removed, I wonder, at criteria, because we're coming up on them graduating 5 years, 6 years, 7 years ago.
Feels like Bortles got inducted in 2023, and I think that's 10 years after he played for UCF.
Maybe it's 10 years is the criteria.
Yeah, because let me see the exact. He was. I'm sorry. You know what? He was. Or was he 2020? Oh no, he was 2021. So that's 8 years. So I don't know if it's 8 years. I mean, you would think obviously he was first ballot. I would think he was on the first year that he was eligible. So, but Jermaine Taylor was 2021 too.
He was 7-year eligibility. I just looked it up. It's 7-year eligibility. Okay. So, and the reason why I think Bortles was a little bit longer is because I think they recently restarted it. I think 2021 was when they restarted inducting
that makes sense.
The Hall of Fame because they took a long break, and I think it was actually Mahajer that said, "Why aren't we doing this?" By the way,
looks like they took a 4-year break actually. Yeah.
So they took a long break there. So it looks like it's 7 years is the eligibility, and then just unless they change it, I'm pretty sure one of the eligibility criteria is that you graduate from UCF or you have a degree from UCF. So,
Right. I mean, so just going back to him, yeah, I agree. I think there's other players that definitely deserve a spot over Darius Johnson if you had to choose, like BJ and Taco. Not only I think accomplished just as much individually, if not more, they obviously had much more team success as a whole. I mean, there was multiple 20-win seasons there. There was the only, March Madness win in program history within there. So one of our highest ever finishes also in the American as well. So, I do think, they would have to, but with DJ, I'll preface it by saying I do think he should be in the Hall of Fame. If those guys are in, then yes, I do
yeah.
think he should be in there. But on one token, when I don't know a lot of those, I actually don't know any of those basketball players I mentioned for you, other than Jermaine Taylor. But because I was in school when Jermaine Taylor was here, when I look at Jermaine Taylor, I mean, that guy was so obvious he was going to be an NBA player. Just the raw athleticism was unbelievable, and just he was a guy. I mean, he was I think. I want to say he was like in the top 5 scoring in the nation that senior year when he had, or that,
he might have been number one. He averaged 30 points a game his senior year,
yeah,
or junior year.
Yeah, and then in yes, it was in Conference USA, but most of the teams he on were close to 20-win teams, so there was team success on a relative basis. Obviously, maybe not as much as like the BJ Taco teams, but whatever. But when I look at it through that prism, I'm like, the Hall of Fame has to be special. You can't. It's kind of you can't just let anyone in there, right? It has to be you accomplish something unique,
Agreed.
and especially when only 4 or 5 names get in there a year, and you look at, when you just compare it to football, when you look at some of the names on here like Blake Bortles and Josh Sitton and Brandon Marshall and Kevin Smith, and I'm like, does Darius Johnson equivalently rank, to those guys? And it feels like no, but but then when you look at the stats and what he just did here in this tournament, and the fact that basketball doesn't have a lot of names in the Hall of Fame and doesn't necessarily have as rich of a history as football and all the, obviously pro talent we put out in football, where we haven't done that in basketball. Right. You think you have to kind of look at all these factors, and I do feel like he probably deserves a spot, especially when you think he just overtook Isaiah Sykes in points all time. He's top 3 in assists and steals. He just had an amazing postseason and hit a game-tying shot to bring, UCF essentially to the finals of the tournament. So I think, all things being said, he should probably, get a spot.
Yeah, I think he was able to solidify himself this past week. I mean, we've spent so much time talking about the longevity of Darius Johnson at UCF, so it's hard to just put it under a microscope over the last week. But hey, he needed a little bit of a postseason, kind of juice to put on his resume, and regardless of what you think about the Crown Tournament, his performance in that, and being on the All Tournament team, which was announced right after the championship game, Darius Johnson was part of the All Tournament team there. Sure. So I think that was a little bit of an extra resume builder to it. Probably already a lock that he was going to be a UCF Hall of Famer. And again, we're talking about human beings on the committee that are going to be selecting these individuals, and I don't see how you look at BJ Taylor and Taco Fall and their impact on UCF as a whole as soon as they're eligible, and them being UCF Hall of Famers. And I think that 7 years from now, as long as the criteria stays the same, I think that the committee of human beings again are going to look at Darius Johnson and his body of work, and also project towards the future of saying, are we ever going to see somebody like that again in the UCF basketball uniform? And the answer potentially to that question could be no. And so therefore he gets in.
Sure. Yeah. No, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, all right. Well, I think we've, talked about basketball here. Obviously, the Knights now look to next year. Going to be a lot of change, as there will be every year. But obviously, lose a guy like Darius and all the other losses we have. We'll see what the roster looks like here in the coming months. But at least we had somewhat of a positive finish to the season. All right, so let's go on to another UCF team, which is the baseball team.
You
Oh,
mind
actually, I'm sorry.
before we move on?
Yeah, we
Yeah,
got
because
the
I want to make sure
yeah,
we talk about next season's UCF basketball team, and we did get a
yeah,
commitment this week in the transfer portal. So I'll just
yeah. Let's
quickly
talk about
mention. Yeah. I want to mention
transfer.
Riley Kugel. So because this was a really interesting announcement for me once I saw it come through the other day, and getting a commitment from Riley Kugel. So he commits to he's going to be transferring to the Knights from Mississippi State. He actually started his career at Florida, but one of the things that was what made it interesting for me is that I watched Riley Kugel play a lot in high school. He went to Dr. Phillips. That's where I graduated from. A former UCF assistant coach in Ben Witherspoon, who has most recently the last 2 seasons been at Mercer, was his high school basketball coach, was Riley's high school basketball coach at Dr. Phillips, and him along with Ernest Uda Jr., who played at TCU this past season, and a few other, and Denzel Aberdeen, who we just saw win the national championship last night at Florida. Like there's some players that were on that Dr. Phillips basketball team that won the state championship back in 2021. And so I remember Riley from high school was hyper athletic. He could shoot the lights out of the ball. Very good shooter. In high school, I haven't seen him play, closely or really watched him closely, since high school. I'll say that I didn't love some of the attitude things that I saw when he was in high school, but hey, he's a 17, 18-year-old kid. So I'm sure that the last few years in college have matured him. And he was a contributor at Mississippi State. It was interesting because he actually committed to Mississippi State out of high school, then decommitted, and then went to Florida, and then eventually wound up back at the place that he originally committed at in Mississippi State. So he's coming back home. I think this is one of those things that hopefully we talk about it a lot in the football sense, but I think in the basketball sense, these guys coming back home, after experiencing a good career somewhere else, I think could be a big win for us. And he's somebody who's experienced a lot of winning. He's a high-level player, and I'm excited to get him at 6'5", 210 pounds. I mean, I think he's going to be a guy that projects as being a starter right away for us next season, depending on, how the rest of this, transfer class goes or recruiting class goes for Dawkins. But I see him as somebody who's coming in here to contribute right away. And we've seen guys the last few seasons of this transfer portal era, come in and be huge, big time contributors that have his same kind of body style and mindset and scoring ability. And as much as I've kind of knocked on Keyshawn Hall's some of his traits, I mean, obviously Jalen Sellers and Keyshawn Hall the last 2 seasons have been huge transfers for us that have come in and immediately impacted this team. And I'm hoping that Riley can be one of those guys, with Jordan Ivy Curry kind of being the only current player on our roster that is like outwardly said, I'm coming back to UCF. This is a big time get. So we'll see who else we can add to this roster over the coming weeks and coming months. But I'm glad we got Riley.
Yeah, it's the obviously first transfer of the transfer window here or whatever. So especially with all we lost, we need bodies, we need depth, and yeah, I mean he's had a pretty solid career, Florida, been in the SEC obviously. So and coming back home to Orlando is cool, like you mentioned, and being a local guy. So good start there, and well, I guess he'll be one of the building blocks for next year.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's the first couple of weeks of the transfer portal window opening are always really tough because all you're doing is losing players, or at least you're seeing players go into the portal. But as we always say, the portal gives and the portal takes and it also gives. So this is the point we're reaching the point in this particular window where we're going to see some guys come on over to UCF, and Riley being the first one. We'll have to see who else comes with him, but that's a good start for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, no doubt about it. And did you say you wanted to discuss other things with the basketball, or is it just kind of?
No, yeah, that was the main thing I wanted to mention there, is that we were able to land that commitment, and hopefully more to come.
All right, awesome. Yeah, good stuff from Dawkins there, getting early commitment here in the portal. All right, so let's kind of move over to the baseball team, another team that's unfortunately struggling right now. Obviously had a pretty strong start to the season, but as they've gotten into conference play, the wheels are starting to kind of come off, or at least starting to wiggle a little bit here.
Yeah.
They're 18-13 overall, but 3-9 in the Big 12. Now, I don't know, obviously, anywhere near as much college baseball as you do, Ben, and I don't know how important the conference record, if it's as important as, let's say, football or basketball, or if it's, because I do notice that they have games against other non-conference opponents in the middle of this conference slate. So I don't know if it's, obviously 3-9 is 3-9, not a good thing, but I mean, maybe it's recoverable, or it's not as big of a deal. But obviously they have not played well lately. They kind of broke up the losing streak with a 2-0 win against our old rivals at Stetson, but then unfortunately got swept by Kansas. And then I know they played North Florida tonight. Do we know if we won this game tonight?
Unfortunately, we lost this game in a walk-off. So we are now, we are actually now 18-14 as a team on this season overall. And to answer your question about playing non-conference games in the middle of the conference slate, so the way it works in college baseball is that you play your weekend series, your Friday, Saturday, Sundays games against conference opponent, and then you typically have one weekday game, which is for UCF it's usually on a Tuesday night, and it's and that's usually against a non-conference opponent. So that's the way that schedule typically lines up. And note, to also answer your question, 3-9 is not great in the conference. I think that this it's been kind of fascinating to watch. And that's probably the wrong term as a UCF baseball fan to say fascinating, because it's frustrating as well. But it's been interesting to watch, because and tonight's game was a great example of it. We had 14 hits as a team. We were able to only push 5 runs across. So we're leaving a lot of players on base. And statistically, there's not a whole lot you can point to say, this is definitely the reason why we're losing these games. Except for I think the amount of, or I should say the low amount of timely hits that we're getting. We're not able to string runs together. We're not able to bring runners around into scoring runs, and that's been a struggle. Our struggle hasn't necessarily been, in my opinion, watching the games, necessarily putting the bat on the ball. It's just stringing them together in order to score runs. That's one aspect of it. Also, it seems to be, while we have a lot of talent in the pitching rotation and the bullpen, and our pitchers, the beginning of the season, first half of the season, or whatever you want to call it, have been basically lights out. They were top 10 in the nation for a long time, up until recently. And they're still statistically on paper pretty good. But what's happening is, and I don't know if it's just these teams that we have played against over the last 3 weekends are just, have figured something out about our pitching staff, but it almost seems like they're pitching really well, and then all of a sudden they make one mistake, and that other team just capitalizes on that one mistake. This Kansas series that we just had last weekend was like a great example of that. It seemed like we would be doing well, and it would be a close game or a low scoring game. Our pitchers are doing well, and all of a sudden, they'd get two little, base knocks and, 2 runners on, and then one mistake, inside fastball, put them in the zone, and just all of a sudden it's just over the left field wall. And it just seems like that's happening. And man, as a parent of a baseball player, but as somebody who's paid attention to a lot of these games this season, I mean, that has got to take such a toll on the team, losing these games in frustrating fashion. I mean, they kind of broke it open late in the game on Friday night, Kansas did, but then to lose a game 9-10, on Saturday night, like, you're so close there. And then all of a sudden, they just really, really poured it on Sunday. It's just been a frustrating. Then we lose in a walk-off tonight at North Florida. I mean, I don't know how Coach Wallace is going to right this ship. I'm sure he's being kept up at night by it because he's a highly competitive guy and he wants to figure out ways to come together. Now, these post-game interviews that I've seen of Rich, of Coach Wallace, he's saying the right things, and I believe he's genuine when he's saying that it feels like the team is still, truly playing for each other and truly together. But this has got to be a really frustrating stretch for this baseball team. It's just, we've lost, I think, 10 of our last 12. I mean, we're just kind of the season is kind of falling apart, which makes that this weekend series against Kansas State at Kansas State easily the most important series of the season. And I mainly say that because we've got basically a month left. So there's not many of these games to go get left. And then on top of that, after this weekend at Kansas State, we've got top 25 conference opponents the next 2 weekends. So number 24 TCU and number 20 West Virginia will be the 2 series coming out after this. Both of those are at home, but certainly you want to go out to Kansas State and take at least 2 out of 3 and just try to get some positive momentum going into another tough stretch of the season where we're going to need to compile wins at this point. Beginning of this season, we thought 40 wins even before the conference tournament was an actual reality. Now we're just trying to scrape together eke out as many wins as possible just to try to get some momentum, and we'll see what happens down the stretch.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I know Rich is, really trying to build the program, and feels like the last, I know we joke around that I don't follow too much the other sports outside of basketball and football, but, obviously being in UCF Nation, you hear things through all the things I'm involved in, whether it's Rivals or Twitter, and being, just keeping my ear to it. And it seems like the baseball team, kind of goes through this almost every year where they start out hot and then kind of falter off towards the end and don't really ever get over that hump. We kind of been stuck as a program, seems to be somewhere in between maybe average or slightly above average overall. Not someone that's all, ever in the dumps and, last place type of team or anything like that, but seemingly tough to get over the hump there. So, I mean, like you said, I mean, there is some time left, but it doesn't seem like, talking about you're 3-9 in the conference. I mean, best case scenario, you're probably still going to be hovering around 500 at best, even if you have a really good stretch to the season, but hopefully They can turn it around.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that gave us hope this season going into the season, and it was certainly solidified by the first month and a half of performance by the UCF baseball team, is we made it to the regional final last season, and in Tallahassee, if we didn't go up against one of the best pitchers in the nation in Jamie Arnold at FSU, like there's a chance that we take home a regional for the first time forever, make it to the super regional, and who knows what happens. And that's in Rich Wallace's first year here. So that obviously gives us a lot of not only, good vibes going into this season and optimism going into this season, but certainly expectations as well. And then, you start out the first month and a half of the season where, we're, top 10, top 5 in batting average as a team in the nation. We're top 5, top 10 in ERA in the nation as a team. And so, you've got all these positive things to point to. But I think what's been evident is the Big 12 is a challenging conference for baseball, just like a lot of the other top conferences are. And once we got into that conference schedule, we've unfortunately haven't been able to rise to the occasion where we're getting over the hump and putting runs on the board that we need to beat some of these teams that are very good. And it's just been a tough slide for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. But we'll see. Hopefully we can. I think UCF has had rough couple years to start in the Big 12 overall for all the programs. But
Yeah.
I think that's growing pains of it. I don't think there's too many programs that you see just across the board in all sports, Olympic, football, or otherwise, where they're all of a sudden just top dogs right away. Even the ones you've seen that in individuals, like maybe one sport where it's like they go into football and the first year they get 8 or 9 wins. You always see like year 2, year 3, they come back down to earth. I think eventually we will get there, and UCF will dedicate the resources that is needed.
Too much talent in this area, too much we're too much increase in the resources that we've never had before coming in the next 3 to 5 years. And so I'm optimistic that we're still a sleeping giant that's about to be woken up.
Yeah, I mean, what would be, I guess based on the expectations that went into the season, what would, be where were we expected to go? Like how far into the postseason? What would have been considered like a good year
for baseball?
Yeah, for baseball.
Yeah, I think approaching that 40 win mark as you go into the conference tournament is something that I think we'd be looking at. I don't think anybody was necessarily expecting us to host a regional this year by any means, but we looked at it as it possibly, it could be a possibility. But that's always going to be tough when the regionals are usually hosted by schools like that are in the perennial, top 10 in the area. And we unfortunately have, Florida and Florida State, who is a top 5 team at the moment. And of course Miami in our state. So it's tougher to host a regional. I mean, even getting back to the moment that we were at last year and competing in the Tallahassee regional or even being good enough to bypass the Tallahassee regional, we don't host, but we're able to go somewhere else, as opposed to having to go to Tallahassee,
right?
And go through that gauntlet. That would be looked at as a success. And, going into a regional with a chance to win it is fantastic. But even making a regional is an accomplishment. And at this point, we got to turn it around quick to have a chance at that. And so I think not making a regional will be viewed as a disappointment, especially after the success we had in year 1 under Coach Wallace.
Right. Okay. Well, good stuff on baseball. Thanks for that insight there, Ben. So I guess, did you have anything else regarding baseball, or do you want to kind of head into these final few segments here?
Yeah. Let's move on from it. I'm hoping that the baseball team moves on at Kansas State and starts to get some winning ways behind them.
Yeah, absolutely. So this week I do have my fun fact of the week, and I did say some of it kind of when we were talking about Darius Johnson, but I wanted to make the case for him and talk. I went into more kind of a deeper dive of stats when it comes to DJ and where he ranks officially. And some of the actually what I said earlier was I was a little bit off. So here's where Darius Johnson ranks all time. So you can be the judge of if he deserves to be Hall of Fame or not. But overall, he is number 4 in UCF history in total assists. He is number 6 in assists per game. As far as points, I was actually wrong. I said 7th earlier, but he moved up to number 5 actually when it comes to points. So he's 5th all time in points. 3-point field goals, number 4 all time. Also, I think I said earlier steals, he was 3. I'm sorry, he's number 1 all time in steals all time. So
number 1, yeah.
Yeah, so we're talking top 5 in points and assists, number 1 in steals. He's, a few others. One stat I actually like a lot is win shares, and he's number 7 all time in win shares. And then true shooting percentage, which combines your field goal, your 3-point, and your 2-point field goals. He's number 4 all time in true shooting percentage as well. So pretty much, I mean, he's a stat leader in almost every category essentially outside of rebounds and blocks, which obviously makes sense given his position. So I think that's really cool to see where he ended up finishing, especially with that postseason. Really passed some big names in school history, whether it was like Isaiah Sykes or passing Isaiah Sykes in assists and points. He passed BJ Taylor in assist. Came 10 assists short of beating AJ Ramsa in assists. So we're talking about some pretty legendary guys in school history that he's up there with. And then the only other thing I had was I was looking for the stat. I was going to ask you since Josh isn't here this week, was to ask you a little quiz question. So the other thing, because you had talked about was, when you talk about just the sheer amount of time that he was at UCF, and that he may be one of the last, probably the last player that spends 4 years here. So he is number 3 all time in games played. Who are number 1 and number 2 in games played?
Number 1 and number 2. I'm gonna say, I think Josh Bodden is still on that list. Josh Bodden, is he number 2?
He's not.
You know what? Maybe
more recent.
Is more recent. Okay, it's more recent.
Both of them are more recent. With both guys that are the top 2 is all within the last.
That's right, because Josh Bodden broke that record when I was still playing, but obviously there's been 20 years then. More than that, unfortunately.
One's an absolute legendary player, arguably the second best player in school history.
So BJ Taylor then?
No. I guess how you look, maybe this would be the 3rd best player in school history, depending on how you look at BJ. I guess.
More recent.
Like recent within the last 10 years, so it doesn't necessarily mean the last 3 or 4. It could be more close to the. Actually, I should say this ended their career in the last 10 years, but started their career more like 13 to 14 years ago.
Is it Isaiah Sykes?
Isaiah Sykes is number 2.
Number 2.
And who's number 1?
And who's number 1?
Number 1 is arguably got to be considered. I would think a top 3, if not top 5 player of all time. Big man.
So I guess is it Taco Fall?
No.
Big man. Keith Clinton. Keith Clinton. Oh my God, I just totally blanked on Keith Clinton. Yeah, Keith Clinton. Okay. So I should have known that actually. I should have known that right off the top of my head, but it's late and I'm already apologize to Keith. Yeah, absolutely. You're right about that. Easily top 5 all time. I mean, Keith is a man. So that doesn't surprise me one bit. Yeah, Keith Clan, right?
Yep. So Keith is 129 games played. Isaiah Sykes is 126 and Darius Johnson is 125. So Darius is up there in everything. I mean, there's a couple of categories that I mentioned. He's also number one all time. Darius is in free throw percentage. So I
Wow.
mean, yeah, so he's really up there in most categories, like outside of obviously just blocks and rebounds. So pretty impressive stuff by Darius, finishing his career essentially top 5 in most categories, if not top 10 and pretty much everything there. So
Yeah.
all right, so I guess the only other segment here is update on sports that I don't watch, which I didn't update this part. So if you didn't, this is from last week.
So that's from last week. So I'm pretty sure like tennis had a good week, and I don't know. So maybe we can wrap up the show because
Yeah, it's already
Josh is
11:30
very
anyways.
disappointed in us. When he hears this, he's going to be extremely disappointed in us. But neither of us updated that segment, and so yeah. Women's golf finished out the Veritex Bank Collegiate in 5th place. I'm just reading off the UCF homepage now.
There you go.
Rowing breaks into the top 15 in the CRCA poll. So I assume that's some sort of national rowing poll. And that's the only thing that I'm seeing on the UCF homepage right now. So I guess that's the update
Good
on
enough for me.
sports that clearly neither of us watch.
Yeah, we have to change the name of the segment.
Exactly.
All right. Well, yeah. So good stuff today. I'm glad we were able to keep the show on despite being a little short-handed. So, we'll be back next week with another episode. Make sure to tune in, subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe on all the major podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, and whatnot. Follow us on Instagram and X. And Ben, with that, go Knights and
Charge on.
charge on, baby.